Alrighty, welcome to this video. Today is talking about reclaiming scrap print work. Normally, whenever I do work, I usually just have my 3D printing pen, and I just usually sculpt my guy out using the additive method, and then clean it all up, and then the whole process. I use that a lot for like a lot of my scenery stuff that I do because it's fast and it's effective. So whether it's a house, a stump, or whatever, it usually works really well just to go additive, and then using my uh, different various cleanup tools from files to um, wood tools to sandpaper, etc. Usually I'm able to really just go through and modify out the work in different ways. But unfortunately, with my most recent prints on these guys, I'm getting a lot of excess material, and that happens with 3D printing. There's always a lot of waste, so reclaiming the waste is a hassle, and most people don't bother with it. And me, on the other hand, I've always found ways of using up scrap because sometimes an old print might turn into something new, or maybe I just don't like where I'm going with something, and I'm gonna modify it out. I think this guy right here was originally a 3D print that wasn't starting to work, but then I used other bits and pieces and I scraped it together, and now I stained it and clear coated it, and it looks pretty nice. Still got to do some finish sanding work and some other stuff on there, but it's where it needs to be. Other ones I usually try to hodgepodge together and start to work from. But this is new. This support is amazing. It's like I don't even know. I can't remember what it's called, but it sort of like scrabbles all over the thing in layers, and so it actually comes off in sheets in a web pattern that's amazing. But as a thick round, I'm able to cut it apart and shape it up with my tool here, just by being able to melt it. And I can compress down and then be able to shape and fold it because it's such lightweight, and then move it around. So today last couple days I've been working just during some idle time, making some terrain for an Underdark series I'm going to be doing for my players. And so usually I have like just the small little types of mushrooms out there, and adding on and creating some mushrooms is pretty easy, especially when they're a certain size. Oh, got a little nub in there. So works well for Underdark stuff. So because I'm not dealing with trees and things, it lets me have a little bit of fun visually because it's such an absurd thing to have those oversized mushrooms. It also works well for, say, for example, they're running like a forest scene, and then they've got that mushroom glade under the trees where the trees are ginormous, and everything's oversized, and they encounter that almost overly whimsical setting where there's maybe like a caterpillar on it, like Alice in Wonderland, or maybe, for example, this is the spawning ground for sentient mushrooms, and then these guys I might have like a different version where there's like it's sort of the arms appear, and they might go so there's a lot of things I might do with this, but just showing a little bit of my process here. I showed you a little bit of the melty on this guy. This is a fantastic support. I mean, I'm able to cut it apart very easily because it just my hot knife goes right through it no matter what it looks like. So I'm able to take off a huge section right away. I also went about heat pressing it. I put it in my heat press for t-shirts and stuff like that with between 2 layers of Teflon, and I can just feel it compress down into this nice little sheet that I'm able to cut with an X-Acto. It was not a problem at all. Like it was relatively simple. Where's my X-Acto? So, and I mean, these sheets are they're pretty decent width on there, but they actually compress down to this wonderful texture that I can sort of just hand cut. So I have various uses for this guy. But yeah, any of the materials look great, and it has a texture on there, so I might actually use some of that texture in another piece, maybe like on a terrain piece that might have that texture, because that's a fantastic painting texture right there. So I have uses for these guys that's going to be great, especially since I now know I can cut this with a knife without having to worry too much about it, and I can sculpt it. But here's this guy, making these mushroom caps here. Went through a couple different phases that I'm in. The first one is starting to shape the cap, which with these guys I would usually take this one and start to do rough forming, and then just try to compress down the bits and tips. Then, after I do that, it starts to refine the whole process. I don't worry about the inside here, but I usually just work on the outside. That might be taking a little bit more extra scrap, you know, in any of the various stages that I might have, from the brims to the little bits and stuff, and just filling in those gaps. And then usually that's where I start to add in all my extra bits. Usually taking my 3D pen, adding in little underside textures, anything else I need to do. This one was actually made of old 3D prints that I've been reclaiming, because they got this long structure. So, and I've got a couple of different versions. This guy right here was actually a lot of these guys put together in a sheet and then shaped out the same way. The other way I usually do it is, if I have something like this, I can fold it over because it's so thin. This is one of the rafts from one of the prints. I was able to fold it over a bunch of times and then just start to compress it down, and as I heat it up, it liquefies the layers and with compression merges them together. So this is one way that I've also been working, trying to make those mushroom shapes for my terrain that I'm going to be doing, keeping in mind a lot of those guys. This guy was literally just a bunch of just raft pieces from the tree sprues, which, let me see if I got one real quick. When I got those organic looking tree supports that just come ripping right off of there, it's usually they're thin, but they're just awkward, and so I just merged and compressed a bunch of it together into that interesting shape. Threw it onto a base from a failed print as well, which was from one of my little attempts at trying to do an FDM figure that just didn't work out well. But then, you know, snip the legs off, I got a perfect base for something else. So there are a lot of little things I can do. It works well. It follows along the lines of just modifying and sculpting, and using this more. I view this more like sculpting in wax than anything else. This is so much reminds me of working in wax, because a lot of times whenever you get things like beeswax, it comes in this almost waffle-shaped sheet, almost exactly like this. And so you end up spending a lot of time with heat tools and stuff, heating it up, and then compressing it all down and cutting it apart and shaping it the way you need to as some of your layers. And then sometimes it also comes as a big block you just basically carve out and then melt and sort of like apply to a soft consistency and then reshape. And this is somewhere in between that, because this maintains rigidity and it's not bad. It's quite flexible, especially this wood PLA. But I mean, this right here, that sheet is super pliable, and when I fused it together, it works well. I mean, that's a amazing texture. I'm thinking I might actually turn this one into a rug. I think this would be a good, like, sort of crazy rug. And if I can, I'm going to go ahead and take another one of these guys and make a second one that I'm going to turn into something crazy, like maybe like the rug is a mimic, and so I'll have to reshape it a little bit and then make a big cut and then heat it up from the bottom and then sculpt out a mouth to make it look like the rug is trying to eat him. It'd be a great little addition for any sort of set terrain piece for any sort of game. And I think that's what I'm going to do with these guys. But let's go through some of the processes we do with that. First one. Like I said, with this guy right here, it's a lot of just a heat and compress sort of thing. And I should note, I have really not a lot of feeling in my fingertips anymore after decades of working in ceramics and sculpture and everything else like that. So if you do have one of these little tools that for 3D printing, with a 3D printing pen and stuff like this, I would use it. It doesn't really fit my fingers. I have to put it on my pinky so it doesn't like work too against what I'm doing. But I'll put it on here just for safety's sake, because I don't not want to advocate this. Also, whenever you're working with anything that could be fuming, here's the disclaimer: use ventilation. Don't work in a small compressed room with no ventilation at all. Maintain a good airflow to get out any sort of fumes or dust particles. Wear masks if need be, because all of these processes, whether it's wood, stone, plastic, etc., they all have their own degree of things that are not good for you, especially when you start aerosolizing and making particles that can enter your body through various means. So keep that in mind. Right now, I have my whole shop opened up just so I can do this video. Normally, I'd be doing it out somewhere else, but let's go through this real quick. A lot of that is just heating it up and then compressing it back down. And you can see how that just flattens it right out. And you can just layer it out and then push and then twist. And this iron is hot, to say the least. It's around, I put it up to around 300 just because I want it to be able to work fast and not have to work too hard at holding it on the piece. And you can see there's a little bit of fuming. That's not from the piece itself. That's from the carbon on the tip. So like I said, use all the proper ventilation that you need, because while PLA is not as bad as ABS, you should always take your necessary precautions. But just a little bit of work starts to shape this guy out. Whoop! Felt that one. And all right. And so as you see, I start to get that shape that I'm looking for out of one of those panels. It halves the size, so keep that in mind if you're working with something like this. If you're working with a sheet, it's a little bit easier. But the same thing, using the side of the tool, you can compress it down and start to shape it out and get to that stage where you're right here. And this, like I said, is just taking your time. In about 10 minutes, it takes me about 10 minutes to get to this stage, another 5 minutes to clean it up once I take a couple panels, a couple little scrap pieces, and do almost like a grafting process where you just hold it over the top of it. I'm going to take that off. That hurts. My hands are too big for stuff like that. But just compressing it down, touching it, compress. Almost like you're using solder or hot wax. So this is definitely like a hot wax process. It fumes just as much as if you were doing hot wax on certain things. Like, I know there's some waxes that are not as bad. Alright, so this is finding the right balance between holding it in place and being able to do this with two hands is sometimes a little bit of a trick. But a little bit of practice and you can get it. So, especially with something that does like to flow a little bit. There we go. You pull it off, readjust. We're not being too specific on this. All right. But we get to that stage where this guy starts to very rapidly, and you can see how fast I'm working. You can even push it on the backside, tweak it out a little bit. This guy very rapidly starts to take on the shape and cleanliness that it needs. Adjust that edge a little bit more. There we go. So, there we go. Now usually I start to clean up that cap really fast, and this is taking me longer because I'm trying to hold it at the right angles for you guys to be able to see what I'm doing in over the shoulder view, which is why this new camera angle works really well for it. But you know, you can see how that very rapidly can start to turn into that. It just doesn't take that much more. Then usually, like I said, it's this guy down here. Then usually, like I said, I usually add in a little bit more or do whatever I'm going to do. This one I'm adding in that texture, and I'm keeping that texture. So I usually do it at this stage. And I build the base up. This base was actually made a lot like this one. And you see how I took a section of that print, and then I started reshaping it, and then added on a little bit more. Made that base look like it was a little bit more on the organic side. So it was just a freestanding base. And you can merge these two. This is on there. So one of the nice things about PLA is that it does hold its heat for a while. So when you're finally done, you can literally sit there, take two pieces, and you're not trying to compress it all, the material. You're just sitting there with it just gingerly touching the tip of it. And you'll sit there and you'll watch this thing be able to almost puddle. A lot like wax, a lot like solder, a lot of like the softer materials that are out there. So this reminds me so much of my college days working with wax. But I don't know if you guys can see it. You can actually watch this thing sort of like bubble a little bit. And then you go to your area there that you're going to add it into, do the same thing. It sort of creates a little pool. Right there. A little bit of back and forth so you can do it when it's really close. And together. Do a little bit of like compression work if you need to. On this one where it's at a base, I need it to be strong. I need to not shift. And then hold it. That secondary heating, what that does is it allows the two pieces to heat together at the same time. Especially when you have the same material, regardless of color, it works well. And even then, right now it's still on the soft side. Let's see if I can't cool that a little bit. Using my fingers as a little bit of a heat sink. There's no heat on the bottom. Alright, there we go. And so now this guy's pretty sturdy. I can't yank that off. And I got a married piece. So that's a good way of starting your base. And actually, I think I'm going to use that one right there. Especially when it gets up to here. Assuming for about that height. Just a temporary little heat up. I think that's good. I think that base is not big enough or stable enough, but you can see how that height can be there. And I'm going to tilt this guy a little bit more. Not trying to actually reshape anything. I'm just gingerly touching the side here. This is just enough to cause it to soften the whole thing. I'm not trying to melt it, just add some structural instability so I can twist it a little bit. I'm going to do that. Using my thumbnail to add in that shape. And act as a heat sink it a little bit. Yeah, look at that. That's going to be a fantastic one. This base as well was one of these sheets right here that I was trying to make a base out of, just a quick compression base, which is different than, say, these guys, which I used the like a silicone grid to 3D print a hollow base, which is what I do with a lot of flying debris, which is what I do with a lot of these guys. This one was actually made up of 2 of these layered up and then added together. Whereas some standard little bases that I might make, like this one that I'm trying to do like a textured cobblestone sort of dimple pattern, was just one of those guys, and then I just built up the sides a little bit more. So something to consider when you're working with those guys is that your base support doesn't really matter. This guy right here is a compression one, which was started out like that and then went through and melted this flat and then added on an extra little ring and then sanded smooth. And I sanded the top, added on the little dimples. So something fun to do with your scraps. I'll probably have a video where all I do is take these scraps and turn it into a figure. I think this one I might actually do that with, just because I think I might be able to do a more figurative face on here. And I was thinking about doing something a little bit more on the gruesome side, just because these are going to go into my D&D game. So I'm thinking that I might make a temple wall. You know, I don't even have a temple wall, but have like this temple wall right in the antechamber, where I think these guys might be able to become like a really nice sculpted, like a demon head almost, that will become that'll probably be about that big when it's all said and done, because it'll shrink about half, but it'll be about a demon head that will have like its jawbones coming down, like almost like a broken mandible to a doorway. I think that would be kind of cool to see that on a battlefield. Yeah, depending on how high it is, might be how big the boss is. But I'll see what I can do with that one, and I'll work with that video. But I think I'm gonna have a couple more of these guys to work with, so I'll have plenty of materials. And I think this is a good start to it, because this has enough room where I can take it and just put a crease into the middle and start to fold, you know, each of the fingers. And provide those structural changes that really start to pop out on there. because I think this will be good. Coming right about like that. And even then I can start to see how that would work. And I'm going to take my time on it. I'm not going to try to force it with just a 2-minute sort of thing, because I want to heat these guys up slowly and keep that heat going as I compress it down into a single reed, and then be able to fold that from this side so I can have that nice clean look to it, angled tips, horns, and then have to start to work on making the inset face features, and then go back in with my additive processes through various means. I think that'll be great. So, there's not much more on this one. So there's some of my processes for reclaiming this stuff, and I've been doing this for forever, just because, you know, it just happens that way. You know, I might have like a print that just does not work well. This one I like, but you know, if I have a print that don't work well, I'll cut it apart and then try to reuse it again. So, like that guy might end up having that process happen to it. Because I don't even know where I was going with that. I was thinking like Techno Demon skull thing, but that really wasn't working, and I don't really feel like finishing it off. So, I like the idea, but I'm going to go ahead and clean that guy up and chop him apart and turn him into something else. Maybe I'll just chop the skull off and then turn it into a just a sci-fi looking robot. But either way, I think we're done with this video. Next up is going to be painting this guy, and I'll get to that probably tonight, but more later, man. You guys have a great night.